So Damien,
Hey, with me, is it?
Show is yours.
My turn. The show is mine. Show must go on. Okay, good. Okay, thank you, Brian, and welcome to everybody who's here, whether it's morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you're all listening from. So I hope this presentation will be interesting, and let's go through. And as Brian says, if we have some questions along the way, we can discuss as we move through the presentation. So I think everybody can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Good. So demand-driven operation model, and we're looking at the alignment of being demand-driven as an enterprise with how we manage standard costing. Obviously, there's a lot that comes in between that. There are a lot of topics that fit and integrate those two different levels of business planning. So as we go through, we find out what exactly is this alignment? What are we talking about when we talk about standard costing, along with the planning methodology and enterprise planning methodology? What actually do we mean? So this is what the purpose of the presentation is going to be. Moving on a little bit, some of you are familiar with us as from our presence on LinkedIn and on the internet about Sustain Group. Sustain Group is 3 partners. So there is Boyan, Emilian, and myself. And that looks like a small team. The important thing to know, and obviously Boyan can give you lots of information regarding what's on our website, what you can find out. There is a lot of information up there. The important thing, and one of the points I always stress, and it's the key point for now, is that our business model is about delivering solutions in collaboration with other companies. So we operate on the basis of strategic partnerships with other companies who are either the innovators or the suppliers of technology or concepts or innovation. We're not there to deliver benefits into the market on our own. Our business model is to do this in partnership with companies who we are partnered up with, and that's the way we believe that, especially in the world that we have these days, it's the most efficient way to be able to deliver benefit to our client base. So, moving on, a little bit of background to what is the demand-driven operating model, and we had a comment from one of our participants at the beginning that what exactly is this when we talk about being demand-driven? Is it about supply and demand, or what is it? So to start off with, let's look at the background to how it all started, to where this area of knowledge derived from and what it means. So the description that I give as a starting point is that it's a set of concepts and principles, but it's not only that. We're all familiar with the approach sometimes with consulting companies when it comes to delivering solutions, and they maybe focus on delivering business improvement, and it's all on a consulting basis, and it's PowerPoint presentations and this and that. So the thing about being demand driven as an enterprise is that it's also a set of software functionality that goes along with it, and software systems that support all the concepts and principles. The demand driven operating model means we look at things at an enterprise level about how you make your organization become demand driven. And it originally started out more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe more, as demand-driven MRP. Now, some people who are listening to this or the recording later maybe know a little bit about demand-driven MRP, DDMRP as it's called. And this was really the starting point for demand-driven principles. And this is where we had some industry specialists, some visionaries who looked at traditional systems. So, for example, an MRP system. What does an MRP system do, and what was MRP good at? Versus lean and just-in-time systems, which took a totally different approach. So we had both of these types of concepts and planning systems that were that basically were conceived as far back as the 1950s. And we obviously had a much simpler world then. We didn't have supply chains like we have now. So when these type of planning systems were originally developed, it was a simpler environment. So we had MRP then, that when we wind forward to the 1980s and the 1990s, it became a much more well-known processing model, because ERP systems became in common use since late 80s, early 90s. So we got ERP systems with an MRP engine at the core. If we look at it now, the way the world has developed, supply chains are global. It's not simple anymore. It's not, that's not linear. Let's say you have your suppliers, your customers in one small chain. It's basically it's a global highway interacting. And this is where MRP struggles a little bit these days, because when we look at multi-level MRP, when we think about the changing demand out there, it's difficult for MRP to react in time. Similarly, we look at a lot of the benefits that lean and just-in-time gave. When we think about that, what is it to be lean? And we looked at all the concepts, a lot of which originated in Japan years ago as well. And that was, let's say, through demand signals. So we get a signal from our customers, we need to supply something, the signal goes back to our supplier, we get the materials in time, we deliver, and that's it. It's nice and easy, and everything is done on a just-in-time basis. Again, the world that we live in is not like that anymore. We don't have that type of simplicity where the supply chain is just directly all around us. And especially if we look at the type of constraints that we've had in the last few years with the pandemic, the type of changes that we've had, it's a totally different environment. So obviously that's not functioning efficiently either. So what the theory was, and the objective was, to take what's best of both of these types of approach, both types of planning systems, and utilize what's best in them. Combine that with also constraint planning. So we hear about theory of constraint. So rather than saying, okay, MRP is better than just in time or lean or vice versa, it's about taking the best of all of these systems and bringing them together. Systems, not only software, but also methodologies of how we run our business. So that was the basis, the logic of where being demand-driven came from. When demand-driven MRP, which was the core concept that developed, when the calculation and the let's say the logic behind how we use demand-driven MRP is that it works the way traditional MRP would, but what we do, it uses actual demand. It uses strategic decoupling points. Now, those decoupling points are control points of stock, of time, of capacity as well. Somebody could look at that and think, well, okay, there's nothing new in that, because basically you can have safety stock here and just build everything for safety. But obviously, it's not only that. Demand-driven involves how you buffer in a strategic way and where you buffer as well. So where in your manufacturing process do you apply buffers, not only stock buffers, but also capacity buffers, labor, and constraints as well, and planning around your constraints. The whole concept is protecting flow. Flow is in capital letters. That's how it was always presented by the innovators of these concepts, because flow is critically important. In order to achieve flow, it's achieving flow of processes, flow of materials, and flow of labor, and also optimizing your capacity. So this is what the whole theory and concept of being demand-driven is all about. While I finish off on this particular part of the presentation, or this explanation of the background to it, what I would say is that what started out as demand-driven planning and demand-driven MRP later evolved into what we now call the demand-driven organized operating model, DDOM, which means that we apply then different elements to it, because we not only do we want to make our planning systems flexible and reacting to demand in real life, in real time, we also want to make our entire organizations function in a way that they're demand driven, so that our enterprise, our operating model becomes demand driven. And this is where we also hear about when DDMRP was expanded to be demand-driven SNOP, so sales and operations planning, because that was an essential part, not only to make planning systems, but to make your entire organization function better as a unit and react to demand. So basically, that's the background to it. That's where all of the concepts and theories evolved from. Okay, moving on. The Demand Driven Institute, where it was the body that was established to deliver these type of concepts and to drive all of this area of knowledge forward. The Demand Driven Institute was set up by these experts, these industry visionaries who brought these concepts to life, basically. So the objective, as I mentioned, was to utilize everything that was best about MRP and lean systems, but also to be able to eliminate any of the limitations of these systems by bringing them together and working in a more effective way, combining the theory of constraint. So this is how the Demand Driven Institute came about. And so these are, let's say, the owners, the visionaries, those who derived and devised these concepts and then brought them into the market. And we also have, I'm making another point here as well, as one of our strategic partnerships, a company called Demand Driven Technologies. So Demand Driven Technologies started out as partners of the Demand Driven Institute, and later became a fully independent company, and their focus was to deliver software solutions based around demand-driven planning. We're in partnership with Demand Driven Technologies. So that's a little bit about the background. Excuse me, frog in my throat today. Of how all of the demand-driven area of knowledge, body of knowledge developed and where it came from. Any questions around that? Not so far. Okay. So,
just I asked the audience, I put in the chat if somebody has a question or wants to just to maybe interrupt or raise a hand to ask the question.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So what we have here is looking at some of the utilization, the business use of demand driven and how we use what it is to become demand driven in a business sense. And what I'm saying here is volatility and the myth of forecasting. So we have some points about that. So we traditionally always heard of companies, of businesses who are forecasting the market, basing your business delivery model on how you can forecast, and also how you can benchmark with your competitors in terms of forecasting, and how you can use that as your delivery methodology, your products to your clients in the marketplace. As time developed, of course, forecasting was less and less accurate because, again, the more complex the business environment becomes, and the more global the supply chain becomes, the more difficult it becomes to forecast. Now, traditionally, we looked at that. We saw that solutions were developed around that. So it was generally the principle, how do we make our forecasting more accurate? And there was a proliferation of, we've seen that in the marketplace, of forecasting software programs that will make us a little bit better about how we can forecast. And we've seen a lot of these forecast measurement techniques, some of which I've mentioned here, about how do we measure our forecast. So it's one thing that we can make a decision, or we can make assumptions about how we forecast into the market, but how do we measure against that? And we've all of the classic measurement techniques, such as mean absolute deviation, mean absolute percentage error, running sum of forecast error, tracking signals, which will tell us how accurate our forecast is. And in general, the underlying basis of all of this is that the future replicates the past. But of course, we know that that's not reality. It doesn't. And when we look at the global supply chain as it is now in today's business world, it's more true than ever that we cannot make any assumptions about what our business delivery model is based on forecasting, because it just clearly doesn't work anymore. And this is where we need to be demand driven. We need to flex to demand. We base everything on forecasting. We're going to get our numbers wrong. We will end up building a lot of product that we don't need to build and can't sell. We miss the point in terms of where we should be targeting our business delivery in the market. So that's again a little bit about historically how companies tended to deliver their business and what the difference is going to be, in the business world that we operate in today's world. Talking a little bit about industry segments, because this was always another interesting point of discussion. And in terms of industry segments, we often heard a lot about different manufacturing types, so manufacturing environments. And a lot of you would be familiar with the manufacturing environments and manufacturing techniques such as make to stock, make to order, as we've often seen categorizations, and they typically fit into a general categorization of discrete manufacturing. We speak about discrete manufacturing as well, and make to stock, make to order, and hybrid combinations of both. Now, again, the industry in general is moving away from categorization, because we have to look in a more holistic way about how we deliver a product into the market. It's not enough anymore, and it's not accurate anymore to say, okay, we're make to stock, we're make to order, or we're this or we're that. We need to look at whatever industry we're in. How do we meet our requirements? How do we meet our demand requirements to be able to deliver into that market? We also tended to see, when we look at business improvement initiatives and business improvement projects, that especially maybe with consulting companies which help to deliver business improvement projects, that there was a tendency to look at, what type of industry does this fit in, and what type of business environment, what type of manufacturing environment is best for this or for that. And again, nowadays, the real world is not simply like that, that everything can be categorized. So we can't just put a label on something and say, okay, we'll improve this in this way, we'll improve this in some other way. It's not as easy to do that. And the point being here that this is the whole concept and the whole objective of being demand driven, is we need to think outside of what that comfort zone was. That if this is an industry, I know this is an industry segment, I know, and therefore I know what I have to do to become better, because I know who my competitors are. But that's not enough, because again, that's simplicity, and the world doesn't work like that. So labeling such as make to stock, make to order, process manufacturing, discrete manufacturing, where does pharmaceuticals fit into that? Where does crop protection fit into that? Where does automotive fit into it? Where they don't fit categories. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about here as well is that being demand driven in those areas which are maybe outside our own comfort zones, but we need to look at this, let's say, as professionals who are delivering solutions for companies to become more demand driven and to gain the benefits of being demand driven. We need to look at other automotive segments that maybe we don't think about. We think about where we're involved in business. Maybe automotive is one that's a bit more, let's say, non-mainstream, or telecoms, oil and gas, ore mining, ore heavy engineering, plastics, injection molding, aircraft, aircraft products and supporting industries around that. So these are the type of industries that it would be impossible, almost impossible to forecast. So we don't look to forecast here. And in these type of industries, our manufacturing tends to be driven on a contractual basis. So that we are not only looking at, okay, that we put so much product into the market, and if we plan to do that, we can fulfill the requirements of our clients. A lot of these type of industries don't work like that at all, because how we deliver our business is according to contracts. So contractual bill schedules, either monthly or weekly, that we're required to be able to supply certain quantities of certain products to our clients. And that's something that we can't, there's no forecasting in that, because we're contractually obliged to deliver in these circumstances. So these are the type of industry scenarios we see in a very complex global supply chain, such as we have today. So within these type of industries, and in general within all types of industries, again, I mentioned some of the ones that we tend to be familiar with, and that we tend to think, okay, that what's typical about this. If we look at, for example, food and beverage, if we look at FMCG, if we look at pharmaceuticals, all of the what we've known as the typical process requirements are all there, such as, for example, okay, we know that we calculate the amount of materials we're going to use in the manufacturing process. We issue those materials against standards based on what we want to manufacture. We also calculate against the amount of production time we estimate that it's going to take to manufacture either units or batch sizes of our products. Now, again, looking a little bit more on a holistic way of industry segments, of manufacturing environments, which maybe are less familiar. We look at what are the key manufacturing measures, key techniques that we need to take into consideration. For example, one I have here, I'll go through them as we have them on the screen. Cycle times. Now, what does that mean, cycle times? What it means, again, is that where I can establish, maybe in industries that we're more familiar with, we can establish the standard quantities to consume based on a bit of materials, a product structure, or in an operations list routing, we can say that, okay, that this is the run time and this is the setup time, and we can look at individual elements. But what's important for a lot of industries, not these individual elements, maybe cycle time. So cycle time and optimization of cycle time is where we look at the throughput time, process time that's involved in whatever manufacturing area, let's say, or whatever work cell or whatever assembly cell we're in. What is my throughput time, and how can I optimize that, and how can I get my best performance from that? Key to that as well is what's called OEE, and I'm sure many of you have heard about that, which is overall equipment efficiency. Anyone who has been in certain types of industries where you walk around the production floor and you see the machinery there, and you've got a green light when the OEE is high, you've got a red light when the OEE is not, when there's stoppages and when there's difficulties on the line. All these are critical to your throughput and how you can deliver your product in the most efficient way. Also, reduction of scrap in the manufacturing process is one that we see, and one that's obviously a big concern to pretty much all companies there in manufacturing environments, is reduction of scrap. It's endemic in some type of production processes, but obviously we want to be able to run with a level of efficiency that we can reduce the amount of scrap that we have. I'll come to scrap a little bit later when we loop back in and connect all this with costing and with being demand driven. what we see as well in a lot of the, let's say, non-standard type of industries, if I would describe it in that way, is that material consumption, again, not measured by I'll plan this amount of material, I'll deliver that, and I'll report variances against it. Generally, again, we look at backflushing materials, especially if you're in the electronics or engineering business. It's not that we will record variances at the point of the consumption of the material, but when our production is finished, we backflush what we have produced, and we look backwards then and calculate any variances. Changeover reduction. And again, companies strive to reduce their changeover times. Obviously, the more you have changeovers, product changeovers, then maybe you have line clearances, cleaning down, prevention of cross-contamination between products. So the objective is to get the best planning in place in order to be able to run as many similar products or the same product in multiple orders, one after the other. Changeover also means potentially tooling as well, tooling and maintenance costs. I'll come to that when we come to setup costs in a little while. And otherwise, I have it here actually as a point anyway. So setup time, tooling change. This is again linked with changeover. So the more changeover we have, the more we have a requirement for tooling. And what that means is that changes in tooling means also different labor costs, because changeover and setups mean that we're having to use maybe engineers and technicians more than operatives, and that adds to the cost of our product as well, because as we know, the more changes you have, you may also have costs of the tools, which are also tools are maintenance objects. They also have a cost in their system, their assets, and their costed as such. And that cost is also reflected into the operation cost. So again, this is going to increase our product cost. So these elements that will drive our cost and make our standard cost higher will also reduce our potentially our profit level. And again, when we look at all of these elements, all of these aspects of becoming efficient and linking with costing, we generally, in a lot of industry types, we measure through shop floor data control systems, or as they're also called, manufacturing execution systems, which will automatically feed back the type of this type of information where we capture in real time and at the end of our production process what we've actually achieved. So these are typical of a lot of the industries, as I mentioned, that maybe we think of them not totally as the standard, or those industries that are in our comfort zone. And what I will talk about as well is that a lot of these types of industries today are using demand-driven concepts to drive their business, and they have become demand-driven in order to give them the flexibility and give them the capability to make improvements in all of these areas.
Okay, let me give you a little moment to have a breath and maybe to have it's very interesting what you put here as key measures. I witness a production system that setups and changeover could take a shift or two shifts, so it's really has a significant importance.
Yeah.
Of course, scrap. It's also critical to the process, and it's maybe somebody else from the audience, if somebody has any comment or question.
Well, you're right. Just to answer your question, Brian, to start with, you're absolutely right. And one of, as I think most companies are aware anyway, that one of the biggest elements of cost in our standard cost is setup time. So obviously, the more changes you have, the more setups you have, the higher your standard cost is going to be. If we make constant changes and constant setups, We don't want to do that for small order quantities. If your setup cost and your setup time is significant and the cost is quite significant and expensive, you don't want to do that for maybe to make 100 pieces or something like that. You want to run an order for 2 or 3 days together for thousands of pieces if you're measuring in individual pieces. And anybody who has worked with standard costing and ERP systems will also know that run a standard cost system where your setup time is for a small order quantity, and suddenly you end up with a horrendous standard cost compared to what it could be. So these are definitely considerations that when we want to become more efficient and when we want to roll out business process improvements, then it becomes essential, obviously, to look at what the impact on costing is. And on the other hand, you're absolutely right with the cost of scrap as well. You and I had a discussion about this before as well, that also there's cost attached with disposal of materials as well. So the more scrap we have that we can't reuse, and in some cases we can reuse scrap and we can put it to good use, but not always. And that, again, disposal is another element of it. That's maybe a hidden cost, but that's also there. That's pushing up in an indirect way our standard cost.
But also for manufacturing, sometimes even overproduction, let's say, to have it could lead to like a stock that you can never realize, or you never sold out. Then according to different regulations, you need to scrap it, which is extra cost. That so it's it's also interesting to mention here. As,
yeah.
Okay, somebody else has a question, or we just continue further?
Okay. Yep, we can continue. So there's a further knock-on effect of all of this, and it's the impact on quality and the impact on our internal quality systems, really, within our organizations. And remember that, you know, quality is everywhere. I mean, we talk about building quality into every into every step of our operations. You know, continuous quality improvement we've heard so much about. So if we think about some of the areas of quality where we want to reduce cost, obviously non-conformance reports. So if our processes are not efficient, then quite often we're going to have non-conformance. So either we have non-conformance in either through our inventory items or through our finished items or items that we sell, or simply as part of our manufacturing process. Non-conformance means analysis and root cause analysis and correction. Again, there's a lot of cost attached to that, and it can be considered an indirect cost that links again to our product cost. Corrective and preventive actions. Obviously, if we have quality issues, then we need to take action. We need to find out why, we need to make corrections. Failure mode of effect analysis as well, because then we need to ensure that we eliminate the root causes, and make sure that we're not falling into the same repeat pattern again, that we get all of the same type of quality issues that we've seen already. We want to eliminate those from our process. And customer returns, of course, is another significant aspect, because if we have it coming through in the products that we deliver to our clients, then it becomes more of a loop that we're dealing with customer returns, RMAs. The more we deal with RMAs, probably there is less likelihood that we can reuse the products. Again, we fall into the same situation that we had, where we're receiving back products being returned, which maybe we don't have the possibility to reuse or to reprocess. And with all of this, again, this is all part of whatever ERP system we use. And we have people attending here with us today who are using SAP, who are using Odoo, and these systems now all have ways to capture all of this information, all of the quality information. And so this is, again, the knock-on effect to our entire quality part of our business, our house of quality. This is the effect of our processes and systems. Moving on. So coming back to demand driven. So we've talked about traditionally, the scenarios that businesses had to deal with, how much different it is in the world today. We talked about the background to where demand-driven concepts and techniques derive from. And now let's have a look at bringing all of this together. And we've spoken a little bit about the impacts as well of our manufacturing systems and processes on our standard costing. So now let's talk again about how we address all of this and how, when we want to become demand-driven, we look at how we can make these types of improvements by becoming demand-driven. So some of the traditional concepts of being demand-driven, and these are the calculation metrics or the calculation algorithm, calculation metrics. I mentioned a little bit earlier about having strategic buffers, buffers of material, buffers of capacity, either finite or infinite capacity, and buffers of processing time as well, which affects our labor cost. As I mentioned earlier, we don't talk about material buffers only about having stock, let's say at bill of material levels, because what we look at is where we have strategic buffering, and not only material buffering, but also capacity buffering and also processing time. And all of this connects to how we recognize changes in demand on a daily basis, because this is not about setting up these values and leaving them set up and revisiting them in a month or 2 months or 6 months. This is every day flexing demand and changing, because this is the concept and the principle technique of what demand driven does is all of these change and flex according to changes in our demand profile. And the whole logic of all of this, of constantly flexing to demand, is that with MRP, as I mentioned in the beginning, MRP is, we're looking at maybe a long end-to-end processing through different levels of bill of materials. And by the time we can recognize a change in demand, we've already ordered product or received product that it turns out maybe we don't actually need because demand has changed. And you get the classic situation with that you've got too much of the wrong product that you can't use, maybe on a raw material basis, and not enough of the correct product. And this is where we lead to customer service, or we run into customer service difficulties because we can't deliver to our commitments to our customers. So key to being demand driven is this concept of being able to flex in real time to changes in demand, and changes in demand signal coming from the market. And as I've said, it's positioning all of our buffers in order to be able to do that. In addition to positioning, in addition to buffering, we also have the concept of decoupling lead time. So when we can do what I've just described, it means we don't necessarily have processes that just run one process. Now you're into a different level on your product structure, then your setup time and your move time, and then another process, and then back to back and end to end. We decouple. So that decoupling means that we shorten our manufacturing lead time, because again, we're flexing in real time to what that demand signal is coming from the market. This is the term for this is actively synchronized replenishment lead time, which sounds like a lot to say, and it is, and ASR lead time, basically. So that's the concept of protecting the longest unprotected lead time in bill of materials. And everybody who has worked in the ERP systems will know that again, it's all about, we've seen cumulative lead time. So we see lead time, we see cumulative lead time, we see cumulative lead time, including purchasing. Anybody who's seen calculations around that, well, we take this element of lead time now because this is its operation. And remembering, we're not thinking only on an operation level anymore, we think cycle times. When we take in an ERP system, let's say the lead time of one operation, and we accumulate it because we're adding it to this and this and this, and then we have purchasing lead time, and then we end up with something that's like end to end. And one of the powerful aspects of being demand driven is that we don't need to do that, because we can decouple our lead times and shorten our total lead time in order to react better to demand. One of the key aspects that allows us to react to demand is, okay, so we talk about changing. Now again, anybody can say, okay, so demand changes, it's like forecast demand. How do I get new demand every week? But again, think on a daily basis. How do we recognize that change in demand? In demand-driven planning, one of the signals, one of the calculators or techniques that we use is planned adjustment factors. So planned adjustment factors are factors that we can place in our demand profile in any planning horizon forward, either in the immediate future, next week or next month. And again, all of these change on a daily basis. So by using planned adjustment factors, this allows our system, allows our planning systems to be able to react in real time. And again, rather than having to go through the whole thing of changing a demand plan forecast or something like that, we're reacting in real time to demand change. So our entire planning system is flexing to demand. And these are the concepts, and this is the programming and planning of how being demand driven means we can deliver to demand and plan to demand on a daily basis and react in real time. Any questions around that? Okay.
Not so far. Maybe we can continue.
Yeah. Okay. So the impact on standard costing. Again, this is closing the loop about how we can use all of this to reduce our standard cost. And I'm taking the points that I had in, I don't know, 2 or 3 slides back, and using these as points to what we look at in terms of optimizing and reducing our standard cost. Cycle times. So first of all, reduce machine and labor costs. Obviously, we optimize our cycle times. Remember, again, we're not looking at one operation by operation. We've decoupled our bills of materials. So it's not anymore about add this operation to this one. And after this one, we've got this setup, we've got this move time, we've got this tool change, we've got this changeover. We optimize all of that and get our cycle times to the point where we want them to be, then our machine cost is reduced significantly, but also our labor cost. And remember, everything that I said about labor cost as well is that the less changeover, the less setup that we're doing, the more we get into a situation where we don't have to use highly skilled resources, technicians, engineers, to do the type of changeovers on a regular basis, and they can focus on other areas of the business where they deliver more value, either on an operational or a strategic level. Scrap also in the process, the either reuse or reduction of scrap. Not only scrap, again, it's also the getting past the situation where we have too little of the right material and too much of the wrong material that we don't want. So this is all part of it as well. So that this is how we optimize our material cost. One of the key benefits as well, and people who know about demand-driven planning and it is, stock reduction, minimum stock levels, it is something that is a huge benefit of being demand driven. No doubt about that. And this is one aspect of it here, that where it's also coming from reduction of scrap costs. So it's not only about reduction. We don't only eliminate the scenario of too much of the wrong and too little of the right item in stock, of the right raw materials. We're also reducing our tendency for scrap as well. Changeover reduction, minimize downtime, minimize labor cost. What do we also minimize with changeover reduction? I mentioned tooling. In pretty much in almost every business, we're running on machines. Machines need certain tooling in order to run. If we have stoppages, if we have breakdowns, then there's going to be more cost of tooling changes, or with changeovers having to use different tooling because the operation, the process is different. If we're constantly changing, then we are also in a situation where we depreciate our asset cost of our tools a lot quicker over a period of time. In addition to that, as I previously mentioned, we also have tools which are integrated into the cost of the standard cost of our process, because any of you who've used operations in routings and in ERP systems will know that tools can be linked in there and tools have a cost as well, so it's adding to your standard cost. We minimize our downtime, we minimize our labor cost, we minimize our standard cost. And as I've mentioned, changeovers with every order, because changeover means additional cost, and standard cost, as I pointed out earlier, is one of the single biggest elements of standard cost. So that's why that's standard cost being one of the single most significant elements of standard cost. Setup time being the most single significant contributor to our setup cost. So becoming demand driven means that we're not only optimizing our processes and optimizing our materials, we're also looking at how we impact our standard cost. And this is the key point here, is what that actually does for a business, but being able to achieve that. Okay. Aligning this with some of the key metrics of being demand driven. And I remember when I started to study the concepts of demand driven planning, and when I took my exams around this, it was about 10 years ago. And there were certain metrics that were used then, and I think are still really valid. And tend not to be mentioned very much, but I think they're very, very significant and very important. One that I've mentioned here is return on capital employed. What that means is that we look at component materials, raw materials, whatever they happen to be. And as we know, in most businesses, there are certain materials that can be used in lots of different manufactured products, either finished or semi-finished, so common use materials. And there are calculations within demand-driven planning with which we can trace the usage of materials which are used in different finished products, different manufactured products, and how we can optimize the usage and consequently the cost of those materials. And comparing that with the, let's say, the traditional disadvantage that companies had of too much of the incorrect material, too little of the right material. So again, this return on capital employed is a key metric which enables us to track and optimize the consumption of materials in our manufactured product.
This is a very good message for the CEOs and financial guys. They will like it.
Yeah, and this is the whole, I think, strategy here, and the whole objective is that we yeah, I go back to my own days of implementing ERP systems, in which you've all done it, and it was always a disconnect there between the operation side of the business and finance side of the business. And within operations, we had the plant director and the planning people who were looking to optimize all of the processes, and basically the objective was to deliver, to improve our customer service delivery numbers, and to get more efficient around that. So it was all about customer service improvement. And then afterward, how do we sell this to the finance people? So the concept we're looking at here is not having two separate focuses anymore, because we all need to look at what the impact of what we do with demand driven planning is on costing. And that's where it brings it all together. Because we take this approach, it means that from the very start, from the very beginning of when we start to become demand driven, we're looking at what's the impact on costing. Our finance people can measure this straight away from when we start to do our first proof of concept on our testing on our processes being demand driven. We can look at it straight away and deliver, the finance people can look at how that will deliver results on the financial side as well. Another point, average daily usage. Again, what we don't look at anymore, again, typical MRP about how much material we order. Based on our demand, and we order maybe to, like order lot size quantities, the right quantities of material that we need, because maybe we get a price break from our suppliers depending on certain quantities. All very good, but again, the risk is that we end up with a lot of product we don't need. With average daily usage, this is a very critical measure as well. For example, in some of the industry types I mentioned, such as automotive, it's not a question of buying the materials we need to fulfill the requirements to our customers. Quite often, suppliers, for example, maybe a lot of you have heard about the semiconductor crisis in the world in the last few years. That's since the pandemic became even amplified even further and a lot worse than it was before. But semiconductor shortage was there even before the pandemic. It became even more critical since the pandemic. And in terms of certain semiconductors, it's not a question of I'll order this from my supplier. Maybe as some subcontracting companies, we have allocations from our suppliers. They say this is what you can have this month. And further down the supply chain, we have our build schedules to our customers, and we deliver for them our contractual obligations of what we can manufacture and supply on a weekly and monthly basis. So it's not a question of choice about I'll order so much material and I'll keep this in stock. It's about schedules, build schedules. Let's say if we're a subcontracting company to an OEM, or the second or third tier down the supply chain from the OEM, we face maybe not issues, but it's not in our hands to decide what we want to order or what we want to produce. It's commitments on both sides, both on the supply side and the customer side. And a key component of being demand driven is average daily usage. And again, this one of the functions that allows us to flex demand and to be demand driven in real time. Again, we're not looking at bulk buying or bulk producing. It's again the focus on what we actually do based on demand. And as I mentioned earlier, planned adjustment factors, these help us to flex to demand, because this is like, it's a little bit like all of the good points that we had with just in time, lean and just in time system, the demand signal that comes from our customer to us and that we send down to our supplier. Planned adjustment factors like that. So this is like the good part that was taken from lean and Six Sigma techniques, where we could use this to react in real time to demand. And that's what demand driven planning is doing. That's what being demand driven does. Okay. Where I am in my presentation. Coming towards the end, we can wrap it up pretty soon. So on a strategic level, we can say that being demand driven, it's up to ourselves as business professionals to ensure that we keep this connection to costing, that it's there. And this is what demand driven helps us to do. Because if we look at it, that we look at the increase in efficiency, the optimization of efficiency, our flow of materials is improved. And remember that word flow, flow of materials, flow of labor, flow of processes, is that everything flows. Think cycle time, not operation run time. Think total throughput time, not operation after operation and setup and everything, because this is what we need to look towards. Improved efficiency, reduced setup cost and changeover cost. It reduces our standard cost. By reducing our standard cost, what do? If our standard cost is reduced, it means that we have a better profitability margin. Our performance is better. So from the, we look in MRP, so fixed cost, indirect cost. So all of these are reduced in a way that has a positive impact on the standard cost. Positive impact on the standard cost means that we can become more competitive because we potentially increase our profit level. We can also better be in a position to compete with our competitors as well. So that benchmarking with our competitors means that we're doing so on a much more efficient basis. That in turn maximizes our market competitiveness. We become more competitive in the market if we're more flexible in terms of how we deliver our product, and that flexibility doesn't come with any additional cost because our standard cost is reduced by being demand driven in order to help us achieve that. So we become more efficient in the market, we become more flexible with a lower standard cost and with prices that we can compete and improve over our competitors. So the benefit there is enormous. It's absolutely enormous. And companies who have become demand driven have realized these types of benefits. And as I mentioned also, it's not only about reduction of material cost, it's all of these other benefits that I've described. And companies who have become demand driven as an enterprise, as an organization, are realizing these kind of benefits that other companies who quite simply are not aware of it. They're not aware of what it means to be demand driven. So they don't know what they missed, but they don't realize, or they can't put their finger on it, why they can't be as competitive as companies who are demand driven.
I have a comment here. All this also contributes a lot to companies being more green and also to reduce the overall, let's say, carbon reduction, because it's also a consequence of this.
Yeah, absolutely. That you can extend, any of these examples, and by extension, there is a knock-on benefit somewhere else. You can take it through all of the elements of your organization, and there will be a benefit to be realized somewhere else in the chain. And that's what you're truly doing and that's why it becomes the demand-driven operating model, because being demand-driven means that you've done it already at a planning level. Now you're doing it at an operations level, at sales and operations planning level, and that makes the entire enterprise. It's about the enterprise being demand-driven. We mentioned, you and I, why I mentioned the word before, resilience. That's our partnership with Demand-Driven Technologies. They're very focused on resilience in the marketplace. And what resilience actually means, and it's relevant, very relevant, because we talked about volatility, the type of volatility in the business world that we have now that we haven't seen probably ever in our working experience. And that type of volatility, to be able to withstand that and not alone survive in business, but to be able to grow and improve and gain market share in business. So it's that kind of resilience that we look at and we measure how we have achieved that through our demand-driven policies and our demand-driven techniques, and basically becoming a demand-driven enterprise company that's demand-driven. So, and again, it totally eliminates disconnects between key areas of the business. And how often have we seen that, finance is over there, operations is over here, and they're like, almost afraid of each other or something like that. We integrate everything through being demand driven, and every area of our organization benefits. Quick word about partnerships before I finish. As I mentioned, we have a strategic partnership with Demand Driven Technologies, which is focused on software and technology solutions around being demand driven, so to deliver the demand driven concepts. They're a strategic business partner, so we work in partnership with them. The Demand Driven Technologies have a software product called IntuiFlow, which is their product, their demand driven product that is rolled out for lots of companies and has been. With Demand Driven Technologies, basically, they were the first company, the first fully certified demand driven MRP solution. They also have to date the most implementations and the most number of clients. So yeah, there are more implementations. The key for us actually in our partnership with them is that they're at the center of the knowledge base and of the technology base that's all around being demand driven. I mentioned the Demand Driven Institute. The Demand Driven Institute were the innovators, the founders of all of these concepts and techniques. And going back to 10 years ago when I took my examinations with all of this, I had contact with the Demand Driven Institute. One of the founders of the Demand Driven Institute was actually my tutor in my certification. So I was very lucky in that respect. And Demand Driven Technologies have that level of cooperation with the Demand Driven Institute, two totally separate companies now, but this is, again, we're at the center, the whole core, the starting point of the knowledge base, all around being demand driven. And that's the partnership that we have, where we can deliver solutions to our client base in the market. I've said on the presentation of software footnote, of course, there are ERP systems which have built-in demand-driven planning functionality or demand-driven functionality. And there are add-on software products as well for demand-driven planning. But I have found, and what I've noticed a lot, is that I won't say majority, but a significant number of companies using software that has demand-driven planning capability don't actually know about it or don't know what it does, because the whole concept of demand-driven is still relatively unknown. Not unknown, but it's still something that companies who have realized benefits of it have developed and grown in the market in a measurable way. Other companies simply haven't become aware of it. Software solutions have it, and consulting companies also that implement ERP systems also maybe don't focus on it too much, either because maybe the knowledge isn't there in-house about demand-driven in terms of how to configure and implement it, or maybe it is to begin with, but because the client base isn't asking for it, they tend not to be asked to implement it. So again, that on both sides, the level drops a little bit. It's just that the knowledge level, there's a gap there between what can actually, what the capability of being demand driven is all about. What I would say is that, and this again is why we're very happy to be in partnership with demand driven technologies, is that to implement the software, it's not something that's plug and play. It means that companies need to know what are the concepts of how to work with being demand driven. They need to know how to get demand driven. As I said, I took my certifications on this 10 years ago, and it needs alignment to business as well. So it's not simply a thing of just looking at where the programs or functionalities are in your ERP system. What a company actually needs to do is to know how to work with that and know how to go from your planning tools to become demand driven on an enterprise level, which is what the DDOM is about. So that's why, as I said, there tends to be a knowledge gap there. And that's, I think, why companies in the market need that type of tuition and education to know how to get them from where they are to become demand driven and to consolidate and improve their market positioning as a result. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, just a second. Summary. Okay.
We have a comment. It's very interesting. So sounds a little sophisticated, but maybe there is no other way. So maybe this is the right way to. The future is now. It's available now.
It is.
It's so the spreading the word is one.
Yeah.
The other is educating the players in this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and bridging the knowledge gap or knowledge gaps as well. As I've said in the summary, so demand-driven principles, the techniques, manufacturing environments, everything. It's through your organization, and it's to make you financially more stable and reduce the standard cost, improve the performance. Improved performance means you improve your positioning in the market. Improve your positioning in the market, you can grow, you can develop, you can benchmark against your competitors and improve against your competitors, those who are not demand-driven. That's the key point. It's the overall business benefit, the enterprise business benefit. To become demand-driven and get the strategic benefits regarding market positioning, regarding profitability at an enterprise level. That's the message. Okay, that's everything that I have to say.
Thank you, Damien. We didn't have much pictures apart from our.
No, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I think it's important to raise awareness of demand-driven, the ideology, and we will be happy to answer any questions you may have now or later. This session is recorded. It will be available on our website. We will send you a link, and also we will publish the presentation so you can use it as you want, and maybe this can open a base for future talks, how this can be. We plan also to make some other events in the same direction to showcase the solution that demand-driven technology is having into flow, and maybe some other slices from what is demand-driven. Thank you. Jordan, you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you very much first for the presentation. Damien, and I have one question. So, as far as I understood, demand-driven means that our capacity is synchronized with the demand of the customer. So
Yes.
let's say next week my customer needs 1,000 pieces of products. The week after he needs 2,000. After that it's 1,500 or whatever. So in terms of managing staffing, for instance, what is the best option? Because if I follow the demand, then I have to be very flexible with staffing as well.
Yeah. Again, it combines, it combines demand and flexing to demand, and also how we maximize our processes internally as well. And remember that the whole concept of flow. So again, the flow of your materials, the flow of your process, the flow of information within the organization, and minimizing any change or any disruption in your production in relation to it. Because if you think about with a classic ERP system, a standard ERP system, or an MRP type functionality, when you get changes in your demand, the tendency is you stop production and you got to restart, you got to replan, you got to go back to your planning, and this is actually what causes the type of disruption, what causes the type of noise in your production systems that you want to avoid. The key with being demand-driven means that you can react in real time to the changes in your demand without having to throw your production schedules out the window completely. And you do this using the type of techniques that I mentioned. So for example, you're calculating around average daily usage. You have the materials needed to align with the type of demand signals that you have coming. And basically your whole organization aligns to the change rather than, and I know the situation you're describing, I've seen that so often, that you have a change in your demand and suddenly everything has got to change. And the sales and marketing people are saying, we have to keep our customer happy, and meanwhile the operations people are finding it almost impossible to react in time. So being demand driven means that we have the calculation points, we have the measuring points in order to be able to react instantly and have the capability to replan, to flex to demand without having to replan everything else. Basically, these are the principles of how it works.
Thank you. We have also another question. It's following the previous. So my company plans to implement better inventory management solution. Also, can this be applied for trade companies, e-commerce companies? How any comment on this, Damien?
Yes, we can. Any company, every company has to be market responsive. So where you need to respond to your market demand, whether you're a manufacturing company, and maybe some companies that I've heard of, some companies who aren't, maybe distribution companies can be demand driven as well. Information companies can be demand driven. So the concept is the same. Obviously, it's applied in a little bit of different way as it would be in a manufacturing environment. And this is why I mentioned the type of industries at the beginning of the presentation, because people typically, there was an assumption, let's say typically, about being demand driven in certain industry types. And that implied certain industry types means manufacturing environments. But we've gone past that now, and which is why I mentioned a lot of the other types of industries that we don't think about. And this also could be, for example, hospitality companies, for example, absolutely can be demand driven. Information companies, technology companies. So the principles can be applied. And again, and this is why the alignment with costing, I believe, is so important. And this is why I wanted to have this particular presentation today, because up until now, I haven't heard any focus being made on how demand-driven gets us into a situation where we reduce our costs as an organization. But this is the key benefit that it does. And that's why I wanted to highlight this in our presentation today. So you're absolutely right. It's not dependent on manufacturing industry. And more and more what we're seeing is companies becoming becoming demand driven in non-manufacturing, strictly non-manufacturing environments.
Thank you. In fact, some details will go a little bit about implementing demand-driven with IntuiFlow, demand-driven technologies. Normally, with educating the potential customers, they offer to get the backlog of orders and to run a simulation test in order to show how using the solution can change the what was in the past. So as a proof of the concept of the effectiveness of its effectiveness, both of the demand-driven methodology plus the software implemented. So this is how normally it goes. So we will definitely schedule another session to speak about the IntuiFlow itself and the way it can be applied to different industries and how you can, let's say, test it in your environment to prove. But it's important first to make it aware, so the people in company to know that this exists, then to have to bring some level of knowledge, and then to bring the software solution to this. So, any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I think, as you said, obviously the recording is there, so participants can listen back to it. Probably a lot of new information, but again, this was the whole purpose, is to get the knowledge out there of what it is to become demand-driven and what the benefits are, what the enormous business benefits are for companies who have become demand-driven, and not only the cost savings involved, but also competitiveness, market positioning,
resilience.
Yeah. So yeah, it's new information, important information, I feel, and where there are the information about this presentation is on our site. So anybody who is either listening now live or who will look at the presentation later, then feel free to reach out to us and ask questions, having thought about it a little bit and having gone through the presentation.
Thank you, Damien, for your time. We're a little bit over the long time, but seems it's interesting. Okay, thank you everybody for joining. On that note, good evening to everybody.
Yeah, okay, thanks Boyan, and thanks everybody who's attended, and hope to hear from you all. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.